welcome back. This is Wayne Madsen with the Wayne Madsen Report, the Sunday Roundup, and we're joined tonight by Mike Springman, who was the vice consul at the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia in the late 80s. And we're talking about how he was forced to process visas by the CIA people over there. And I recall what Robin Cook, the then ex-British Foreign Secretary, said, I think in 2004, or he wrote an article in The Guardian, and he said, look, Al-Qaeda is merely a database of all these mujahideen recruits and financiers and logisticians that supported the mujahideen. It's called a database. He said Al-Qaeda is a CIA database, and of course, Mr. Cook met an untimely demise while hiking up in his native Scotland. There's still a lot of questions about that. But Mike, so you were being confronted by the CIA, and it does look like they were building up this cadre to not only fight in Afghanistan, but possibly in other places, including right here in the United States.
Yeah. And the one thing I could never figure out, and nobody knew anything about, was where they were sent in the United States for all this training and debriefing and so forth. But, the government sure didn't want to hear about it. I went to Congress, to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, to then the Government Accounting Office, that is now the Government Accountability Office. I went to the State Department's own Inspector General, and nobody wanted to hear about it. In fact, two investigators for the Inspector General's office in diplomatic security said, oh, you have a personality conflict. And I said, well, I'm sorry, the difference in my visa refusal rate and my predecessor's visa refusal rate was about 5 percentage points. But, I named names. I told them exactly how it was done, and they simply didn't want to hear about it.
Right. Mike, we've got a caller. Let's take a couple calls. We have Kathy calling in from Louisiana. Kathy, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is for Mike. You kind of answered it a second ago. I was going to ask about the visas and what kind they were, if these were single-entry visas or multi-entry visas, and if, what exactly was their final destination, if they were on their way to North Carolina for possible training at Harvey Point.
Well, by and large, these were non-immigrant visas, and depending on how many entries and the duration of the visa depended on the nationality of the person, and it was basically on a reciprocal basis. Germans would get unlimited multiple-entry visas, whereas the other countries might not. It would be a single entry or 2 or 3 entries or whatever. And by and large, I once did a survey hoping to write a report about it, and it came to nothing. But I began asking questions of people, well, where are you going in the United States? Why are you going there? And so forth. And it was basically to visit family, to visit friends, to go to Disneyland, to kind of innocuous sort of things. I think one German fellow wanted to see Wyoming and Montana and the Yellowstone National Park, but by and large, they were pretty vague, pretty bland reasons for going,
right?
And they're short on specifics.
Okay, well, I guess, Wayne, you can call Harvey Point Disneyland now.
Right, and we know that Dan Hofsicker referred to the area around Venice, Florida, where some of these guys were seen training on airplanes. He called it Terrorland. So maybe it was in Florida, but it wasn't quite Disneyland or Disney World. But thanks for calling, and let's take another call. We've got Ken from Massachusetts.
Yes, when we look at some of the people in the Bush administration, like Pearl, Wolfowitz, Spice, Abrams, the list goes on and on of people in his administration who were Jewish and who had very close ties to Israel. What do you think the chances are, as some have suggested, that these people were sort of in on a Mossad Jewish Israeli operation to orchestrate the attacks on 9/11 to garner support for America's war for Israel in the Middle East.
Okay, let's take that. Mike, we do know that the Saudis and Israelis have had a very not a well advertised, but the intelligence services have worked together for quite a number of years, going back to something called the Safari Club, which included at one time Iran when the Shah was in charge. But were you aware of these links, low-level links between the Saudis and Israel, but also we know there were links to Egypt as well?
Well, when I was there, the base chief, Eric Qualkenbush, mentioned that the Saudis and the Israelis were apparently at odds on the surface, but there was, connections between them that showed that it wasn't quite as awful as people would have it out to be. Furthermore, in the Washington Report on the Middle East, which details the Israeli connections to the American government and to the countries in the region, they say very specifically things like Congress is AIPAC-controlled territory, it's occupied territory, and that the Israelis desperately wanted in the worst way to destroy Iraq because they feared Iraq, and now that they see Iraq out of the picture, they're looking at Iran, and they developed a great and unreasonable fear of Iran as well.
Yes, and did we also see something very similar to how it played between Israel and Egypt with if we sold weapons to Egypt, of course, we'd have to sell much better weapons to Israel. The same thing happened, of course, when we wanted to sell the AWACS planes to Saudi Arabia. The Israel lobby raised Cain until they were assured that they were going to get the best U.S. fighter aircraft and other defense systems better than what we were giving to the Saudis to get the lobby to at least not actively oppose sales of weapons to Saudi Arabia.
But the Israelis worked very closely with the Egyptians to keep the pressure on the Palestinians and all of occupied Palestine. They wanted the Egyptians to help them block supplies of medicine and food and things like this getting into Gaza and elsewhere because they wanted to drive them down and keep them hungry and keep them despondent. So, the Israelis work with whoever they want to get the results they want.
I remember one former U.S. senator told me that when it came to providing weapons to Israel and basically lobbying against weapon sales to countries like Saudi Arabia, it was Henry Scoop Jackson from Washington State who was like more pro-Israeli than even, believe it or not, Jacob Javits from New York, who was a Republican. He was Jewish, but Scoop Jackson was more pro-Israeli than Javits, if you can believe that. But that was apparently the case.
May I ask one more question? I'm looking here. I'm looking here at a parcel list of Jews in the Bush administration at the very top levels, and the list is just endless. I'm just curious, shouldn't Americans be somewhat concerned that there is such a heavy concentration of Jews in the presidential administration, most of whom have quite a close ties to Israel?
You mean people like Rahm Emanuel, whose father was a terrorist in British Mandate Palestine?
Right, and he was the chief of staff for Obama. I think you can basically say that the Israel lobby, and look, it includes people like John Bolton, who apparently I'm told is a member of the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church. But we've got Roman Catholics who are just as big with this lobby as some others. Although it's true, the preponderance of these individuals, I don't even think, many of them probably aren't even practicing. They're more interested, like Henry Kissinger, in the skullduggery of supporting this project for a new American century than anything else.
Exactly.
And I would note that it was recently revealed that Richard Pearl was actually hired by Colonel Gaddafi to help improve his image here in Washington. So we see a lot of a lot of people trying, I think, make money. We know that Pearl and also Kissinger were also involved in lobbying for the Saudi government. So I think there's people who are using the Middle East and these regimes to line their own pockets. We've seen that with the Saudis. We now see it with Gaddafi. Certainly, we've seen it in Morocco, where there's a huge Israel lobby presence and has been for a number of years at the U.S. Embassy in Rabat. And, of course, King Mohammed there is under some pressure now from the Arab Street. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Did you have any other thoughts about what's happening in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I mean, when I was there, the expatriates in particular always talked about the situation in Saudi Arabia and how it's got to change. It's going to change, and despite what the American government always claimed, that it's as stable as the Rock of Gibraltar used to be. And it was basically people saying things like, well, maybe not this year, maybe not this generation, but a couple years in the future, a generation or two into the future, we're going to see some real changes because these people travel. They go to the United States, they go to Europe, they go to study, they go to work, they go on vacation, and they see the differences. And, they all went home, put on the uniform, and went back into the old Saudi mindset. But, underneath of it all, something was percolating. Right. And I'd met Saudi women who were well-connected, who had a lot of money, and they spent most of their lives outside the kingdom because they wanted to drive cars, dance with men, go out to the ballet and things like this, which they couldn't do in Saudi Arabia.
Right, and I've spoken
the Arabs themselves don't like the Saudis. They see them as a bunch of crazy fanatics, not to be trusted, very unstable. And a country that was bound to come apart at the seams sooner or later.
Right, and of course it was cobbled together after World War I. It became a unified kingdom in the late 20s or early 30s. It was called the Kingdom of the Hejaz and Nejd. It was actually split, right? The Hejaz was western part of Arabia, and the Nejd is what we now refer to as the Eastern Province, which has this large Shia population, but it's almost conceivable that if we see a major overthrow or revolt in Saudi Arabia, we could see two countries come out of that.
Yeah, and the Eastern Province is where most of the oil is, and it's the Eastern Province where the Saudis are oppressing the Shia. And
That's
the
right.
Hejaz is the western, more Manhattanized, if you will, province of the kingdom, because this is where the people going on the Hajj to Mecca would go through. They would go through the port of Jeddah for the most part.
Right. So essentially what we could be seeing in Saudi Arabia is maybe the United States government. We're seeing, I think they're starting to draw lines in the sand, no pun intended, basically saying, okay, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, but let's not see any more overthrows of these U.S. supported dictators. And we see that playing out in Yemen right now, and also in Jordan, where they've had many American officials go over there and reassure King Abdullah there that he has our firm support. But then we see this shining democracy, at least that's what the neocons called Iraq, where people are now in the streets in a major revolt against the Maliki puppet government, saying, look, we don't get any, there's no infrastructure, food prices are going up, we don't get any social services. Essentially all those things they used to get under Saddam Hussein, they're not seeing that anymore.
Yeah, Iraq in the past, and not the distant past, 20, 30 years ago, it was one of the few countries in the world with an entirely literate population, like 98, 99%. It was a country where women could study, where they could have jobs, where they had positions of power and influence, and people had a middle-class standard of living for the region. They were in pretty good shape. And then with the result of Saddam and America backing Saddam and his war against Iran and the destruction and dismemberment of the country following the First and Second Wars there, Iraq survived the Mongols, but it won't survive the Americans.
Absolutely, and we saw the looting of the treasures out of the Baghdad Museum. We saw similar things happen in the Cairo Museum, and now there's a report today that there's looting of museums and archaeological sites taking place now in Libya. And I think these are all very professional jobs, as we saw in Baghdad and Cairo. We know that the people that went in there knew what they were getting. I would not be surprised to see that this is yet another operation being conducted mostly by Israel that thinks that they've got some sort of cultural birthright to a lot of these archaeological treasures.
Mm-hmm. And it's the way of lining your pockets by selling something on the black market that would never come up for sale in a million years.
Absolutely, and we saw even U.S. military people involved in that in Iraq said that this stuff was winding up on the international black market. Many artifacts and relics were lost and have never been recovered, and we saw the same thing. Now we see it playing out in Libya. It's just too bad that Interpol seems more interested in putting out these red notices for individuals, and they don't seem to have much interest in going after the perpetrators of these archaeological crimes. But anyway, well, thanks for calling in and participating in the program tonight, Mike, and we'll be tracking what's going on in the Middle East, and we'll have you back if that things get hotter in Saudi Arabia, or as my friends in the Saudi opposition say, plain Arabia. Thanks for joining us tonight. To speak. Yeah. Okay. All right. And let's go back to the phones. Lark is calling from Texas.
Forgive me for asking this question. I had a friend who was an Iranian Jew whose father literally became a billionaire under the administration of the Shah. And we know that Shah of Iran and his family lineage was Jewish. My question for your guest, if possible, or yourself, Wayne, is it not true that the Saudi royal family was originally Jewish?
Well, this is something that is spoken about by a number of people in Saudi Arabia. And it goes back many, many centuries. Apparently, the Saudis were related to a Kuwaiti Jewish merchant family, but you got to go back to about the 1300s to find that link. Anyway, we've got a break here. We will be right back after this short break. This is Wayne Madsen from Washington.